Hey everybody, welcome back to the Meeting Porch. I'm your host Jim, and I have a special guest with me. She is a trusted advisor who works with leaders and visionaries to actualize their potential. Traci does this by inviting people on a journey, not to perfection, but to self-improvement. She creates a laser focus that allows someone to look inward so that way they can then create a lasting impact in the world. Her base of operations is in her business called the Innate Coach, which is all about helping those visionary leaders find their innate gifts. Recently, on 3 September 2021, she published a book called Looking In. In this book, you will go from cover to cover, a process of becoming your own visionary leader. And I can tell you this, it is a really good book. It is short, it is quick, it is to the point, and you won't waste time reading it. So this can be found on Amazon and any other place where you can find a book. So thank you so much. And welcome to the Meeting Porch, Traci.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to see you, James.
Thank you. Well, we did talk recently about your book on an offline conversation. And so how's that going? How's releasing the book? And if I'm not mistaken, you were doing the audio version of it.
Yes, I'm going to be working on the audio version of it as well in 2022. So yes, it's going well. I mean, it came out in October officially. And it was about a year, of writing it, and it was a wonderful experience because, I'd never written a book before. I do a lot of writing, but, the first thing I think I learned about writing a book is that you have to kind of do it your own way. There's a lot of people out there and they can give you the tips and the tricks and what worked for them, but really like anything else in life, you have to discover it. And I make the joke when I say that the book really wrote itself. It just used me as a vehicle.
That's normally the best ways. Well, part of the Meeting Forge is we first get to start with your life story so far. That's where we kind of start forming everything. And then we'll get into the hammer, the sword, the pen, and the crown. And then we'll go through summary and whatnot. And one of the things that I have to just ask, just in general, is my favorite and most dreaded interview question is, tell us about yourself and where you're from, Traci.
That's the most dreaded. So I am from Denver, Colorado originally, and grew up there until I was 18, and then left for undergraduate. And pretty much from that point forward, I'd been moving quite a bit. From 18 to 36, I moved, I think, 5 or 6 different times to different places, which was really a wonderful opportunity. And then I'm in North Carolina now, where I've been for about 14 years. So that's the second longest place I've ever spent any time.
14 years in North Carolina. What ended the wanderlust?
Starting a family. Not to say you can't move. And, I used to, in fact, I had friends from undergrad who were, nomadic, and they had kids, and, they would move all the time and the kids went with them. And I used to always think, God, that I just have a lot of, they inspire me. I have a lot of respect for, how they can do that. But for us, it was really a matter of settling down in one place. I grew up in the same house, and my husband more or less did. And it was great to have that stability, and we really wanted that for our family as well. So that's kind of where we stay put. I mean, we travel from here, but yeah, it's not easy. I'm used to, I like to travel and I like to move around. So for me to stay in one place, I mean, I am visionary, as you mentioned, so it can be a little challenging.
Well, one of the things that I really found interesting, and maybe I'm mistaking this, but let me hang on a second. I just want to make sure about this, because I saw it in it. Okay, yes. So here we go. All right. So one thing that I really found interesting was in your bio on the About You page for the Innate Coach, people can put in a few different areas, right? If you live in Colorado, typically speaking, adventure is kind of in your repertoire per se.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you grew up around horses, correct?
I did not grow up around horses. My mother grew up around horses. I grew up being introduced to horses. I mean, I'm very comfortable around horses, but I did not have horses around me all the time growing up. I lived in a city. So I was in Denver proper. And although it was funny, I mean, that kind of makes me think of a story of just real quick. My freshman year roommate was from the Boston area. And I remember when we first met, over the phone, getting to know each other, when we found out we were going to be roommates, she was like, "Oh, you're from Colorado, so you ride horses to school." Well, no, that was in the 1800s. So I think there are a lot of preconceptions that, Colorado is not anymore, but certainly when I was growing up, that still it was kind of a Wild West type of. It's
an adventure paradise in a lot of ways. A lot of the content that I follow too, like as far as off-roading is concerned, is a lot of adventure and stuff like that. And so I guess this is probably the best segue is, it's not you that grew up around horses, it was your mother. Correct. And what was one of the most important lessons that your mother taught you?
It was, my mom used to watch me as a small child, and she said she prayed for that I'd someday find a sense of peace. Mm-hmm. And I think there was that, she could see that visionary in me, that just that whirling, constantly moving, constantly needing to, expand and make things, different and better, really. And I think probably the biggest impression she had on me was her sense of grace and peace. And just that you can still get a lot done. And actually the best method to approach things and getting them done is with peace, grace, and groundedness. And that is definitely, I mean, that's why she was, you probably are referring to a post I recently put up about her being a horse whisperer. And I think that's why she was able to be, trusted by these animals, these wild animals who have very high instinct, very bright, because she truly had this groundedness and sense of peace about her. So yeah, I think that I don't believe it's an accident who we're raised by, who we're born to.
And how was your father in all this as well, if you don't mind me asking? Like how did what lessons did you learn from your father?
Hard work and not giving up. Yeah, diligence definitely from my dad. My dad's kind of like me. He loves to travel. He loves to experience things. He's incessantly curious about everything. He's always reading various different types of literature and articles, and he just likes to learn. And he also grew up. So my mom grew up on a farm, in a ranching community, and my dad grew up on a dairy farm. And so he was up early in the morning milking cows before school. And so it was a lot of laborious upbringing on both sides. And I think they both taught me that, but my father probably more, he really demonstrated it and spoke to it a lot. You're not going to get anywhere if you don't, apply yourself, and everything's incremental. So you can't expect to work really, really hard and then, just kind of sit back and expect, to rest on your laurels. And I was a very competitive swimmer starting at the age of 6. And so I think some of that training, really got into me as well. And because, it was a lot of practice and a lot of consistency. And just because you won a race didn't mean you're necessarily going to win the next one.
I agree with that in more ways than one. And so I guess, and then I kind of want to shift gears into this period, and maybe I misunderstood. So you left Colorado, right? And you went on this, I'll say a meandering journey to land in North Carolina for 14 years. When you left home and when you arrived in North Carolina, settled down, what was some important experiences that you pulled away from that?
Oh, geez. Wow. That whole period of time between 18 and 38.
You can pick a few experiences. You don't need to
Yeah, I had so
over.
many.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, my life is really, if I look back, my life has a lot of, like, I think we have singular patterns in our lives. And, one of mine is definitely forging through the fire. I mean, getting developed through, like, trial by fire, as they say. Because there were plenty of experiences that I had that, especially when I was living in Switzerland, which was my junior year of undergrad, and then again after my senior year when I graduated. And those were probably some really highlight and challenging times, as well as when I was pregnant with my daughter, that taught me how to, my whole concept of the book, Looking In, was all about finding that sense of, again, going back to what my mother wanted to instill in me, that sense of groundedness within, that if we're looking for I learned that if I tried to look for my measure of safety and security outside of myself, it usually blew up in my face. Like, not just slightly. It was the lesson I was really meant to learn. And in those particular time periods, I had some extreme challenge that I was up against, that the only place I could find that stability was within, because everywhere I tried to turn outside of myself, it just seemed to become less and less stable. So, I learned a lot how to be independent, but not just not kind of brazenly independent, but independent with intention, of really growing myself, not just I'm alone because either I can't find someone, or I'm choosing to be alone because, I'm it's kind of a defense mechanism. It was really more, how are you going to build yourself and grow yourself in this time where you can focus, on that. And like I said, situations in life, as I think they often do, kind of helped me. They were my definitely not my adversaries. It felt like an adversarial situation, but it was really those situations were my advocates in a lot of ways.
Did you So you prepared yourself in this moment of growing, like in your journey, and then you decided to settle down, right? Did you feel that something, I guess, what went well with that and what went poorly with that, if you don't mind me asking? Like where were your shiny spots and where were your not so shiny spots?
In settling down, in the decision to settle down, it wasn't easy. I mean, I keep thinking about the analogy of the wild horse and the visionary. I mean, it really is such a true one. When I first got married, I was like, probably my husband probably felt it was a little bit like, breaking the wild horse. Not that he was intentionally breaking my spirit by any means, but, it being so very independent down to my core, it was very strange for me to suddenly not share space. That wasn't a big deal. It was more this idea of accountability, and I don't just show up 10 minutes later and not let the person know, kind of thing. I take care of me, you take care of you, was kind of the early days of my marriage, because that was just so much a part of me and my core. And I think, as we all, whether we're in marriages or, long-term relationships or not, we can recognize that doesn't always make for the most cohesive partnership when you have that kind of way of doing things. So, a lot of it was learning how to do that. And then also too, there were a lot of issues with getting pregnant, as well as during my pregnancy. And then my daughter was born with a condition where she needed to have 3 surgeries before she was 2 years old. And she was born up in Baltimore. And so we were going back and forth for those first 2 years. She had a colostomy. So you can imagine an infant with a bag on the side of her. And, we had never had children, much less a child with this kind of condition. And I also suffered from really, really pretty disabling postpartum depression. So those early years were difficult. They were very difficult. Financially, my husband had to start his business all over again, and we didn't have any friends or family in this area. And so, it really was kind of like, okay, what do we have? And that's how I got I've gotten through any of my challenging situations in life. Not focusing on what I don't have, but looking for the tools and the opportunities and the places where I do have what I need to, again, I keep using the word forge, probably because you do, to forge my way, to find my way forward. And so there were a lot of downtimes but for me, if I look back, I don't remember focusing on it. I don't remember, even, when they say it's like the people that are in severe poverty don't even realize it sometimes, that's just that's where you are and that's what you're working with. And so, I think focusing too much on comparisons and where you want to be versus where you are, can sometimes, especially when you're really in the thick of it, can be detrimental. So, it's just, I spent most of my life being that way. Again, coming from Colorado, coming from a family where, my dad also too taught us the value of it may all be gone in a minute. So don't get too expectant. So it kind of comes with the territory and I think what I wanted to experience, in my life, not only from a physical conscious level, but from a soul level as well.
That's perfect. I love it. So as we forge ourselves, right, we do when I envision this process, it's a way to look in. Now we use your language, right? Looking in, but also it's kind of like a chart. Like you can see where you've been, a map of sorts. And all right, welcome back to the Hammer. Or this is actually your first time, so welcome to the Hammer. So as we look at our stories, we see, I think, the materials in many ways. And to make another kind of parallel to your book, The Zone of Brilliance, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. And this is where we kind of have to start pulling things together and in the forge of life. That's why we call it the Meeting Porch. And in this process, we bring materials. There's a process in and of itself, right? And that can go awry. I think you actually even alluded to something like that in your book. And I thought that was interesting. And then we start bringing them together in a furnace and all that fun stuff. And so one of the things I'm seeing so far is it's like independence is a material, right? That independence aspect. I would say you've definitely inherited the grace for sure. And I definitely want to kind of dial in a little bit more into that later. And that out of grace comes peace and groundedness. And so as you start to bring these elements together, what's been the most difficult part of making who you are today?
That's such a good question. Making who I am, because I'm really thinking about it in terms of the way you're asking it. And I don't know if I've ever thought about it in terms of making who I am. But I feel that probably giving myself, the most difficult aspect has been about giving myself permission to be the me that's most authentic, if that makes sense. Because a lot of my life, I was really challenged in who I was, challenged by others, right? Taken on, told, no, that's not the right way to do it. Or why are you doing it that way? Or you're being bad, the way you are is not good, was the message I was getting. And so, after a while, I think there's a bit of kind of, in order to get along, you feel, or I did, feel like I needed to let go of who I truly was. Right. So I think what was challenging was not being my own advocate, right? Not being fully, not that I blame myself, because we can see why we do these things, But if I do look at the challenge, that's probably it. I know there was a lot of me that, we can never really truly let go of who we are. And yet we can stifle it. We can shove it in a corner. We can just downright bury it. And for me, I don't think I ever did that necessarily, but I would only bring it out when I knew it was safe. And so I think I've spent a lot of time very guarded, trying to ensure that I was safe in whatever way I felt, right, that it was deemed to be safe.
Exactly.
And so I think that just trusting that I was doing the right thing, where I am now, like if I look at it from my standpoint now, is like, I trust fully in. It doesn't mean that I'm always right, and it doesn't mean that I don't have things to improve on. But the core of who I am, especially in my coaching, I find when, a lot of what I am is intuitive. Most visionaries, our percipient quotient is strongest, right? Our gut instincts. And so really trusting that wholeheartedly, even sometimes if it means I have to say things where I'm seeing, there's one aspect of me going, oh, I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm literally being called to do so. And I feel that that's the value, right? The value is in the calling. So I think the permissionary stuff is where I was most challenged early on.
And so I think that's really interesting because so you have to challenge yourself to being authentic and let me know if I'm off here, but to trust in the process of self-development.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Right.
Yeah. That's very well put.
And you also have to give yourself permission for that. And I think that the big thing I kind of want to draw in on is maybe who was one of your greatest influences that helped give you permission to trust in the process of self-development?
Actually early on, it was my mother. And then I remember vividly when I think it was between my freshman and sophomore year of undergrad, was when Oprah Winfrey first hit the scene really visibly. I mean, she had been in Baltimore, right, on the news, but she had gotten her first show when I was in college. And I remember actually was with my mom watching that first episode of her first show. And I had been considering, because I was an English major at the time, and I'd been considering journalism. And, I remember watching her with such just interest and saying to my mom after the episode was over, I'm like, there is something tremendous about that woman. Like, maybe I want to go into journalism. Like, I want to be an interviewer like her. She has a brilliance about how she interviews people, and she pulls the best out of them. And ever since that day, I was entranced by her, and watching her rise through, to her now current stardom. It doesn't surprise me, there's what I was picking out then was her innate brilliance, right? Really what she does best. And what I always tell people is that when we have that kind of intense interest that we lock onto in someone, whether it's an intense interest because we like what we see, or it's an intense interest because we detest what we see, it usually means that there is a seed of that within us, right? We're recognizing in that mirror that is someone else, something that is at least, a seed of potentiality in ourselves. And so, I've seen very similar kinds of things. Now, would I equate where I am in life to Oprah Winfrey? Not directly, but indirectly. I mean, I've always watched and said, well, it's kind of that when you see somebody who's female, a minority, right? And all the things that she's been through in life, rise to where she is today, it kind of sets the tone, right? And says, well, if this person can do it, then we all can do it. And so she has been a model for many, many years for me. But again, my mom, she's a very quiet leader. She's like I said, she's very graceful. She's very dignified. But she also is a brilliant artist. I mean, brilliant. When I say brilliant, I mean like Michelangelo brilliant. She is a sculptress, a painter. She's really nothing she cannot do artistically. But again, she doesn't promote herself. And so she never, like many great artists, didn't become great. Their works become great once they've passed, or because somebody else took their work and, and promoted it for them. But I've watched that, and I've watched her artistry over the years and how much she attends to the details, because the details matter to her. And again, she's not looking for attention or accolades or anything like that. So, I'd say both of those influences, one more out in the public eye and shiny and seen, and the other one, you wouldn't know it, right? Unless you knew her work and you kind of watched her carefully.
I don't think I've ever had an interview where I didn't like what somebody was saying. So I like that a lot. I appreciate you sharing with that. I liked the model from afar, right? And like we all know, Oprah is extremely inspirational and motivational in more ways than one. Her interview style is very, very interesting, and she's able to cut deep very quickly, I think.
She is.
And then oh man. Okay, so welcome to the sword, right? You're in the present moment. It's the zone of achievement. So all the more reason for somebody to pick up her book, looking in again, like I'm really getting after it. Like there's almost, I would say, some one-to-one like parallels here in these things. So it's out in the public consciousness, and it's awesome in that way. And so one of the things that I kind of want to hit on here is, as you make yourself and as you make your sword, that in and of itself becomes a work of art, because you are pouring yourself, your energy into this and all of these things. And it's at a moment, a glimpse, probably where and who someone is at any given time. And I loved how you drew on your mother and you called her an artist. And also, just a few moments ago, you also sat there and said something to the effect of, we all see little pieces of ourselves and others. And the first question is, how do you see yourself as an artist?
Yeah, well, it's really funny you should ask that question, because all of my family are more hands, like they form artistry. So my dad is an architect. My mother is an artist. My brother started out as a carpenter, and then had his own building business in Chicago. Now works for a big building firm, more as in a leadership role. So he doesn't really work with his hands as much anymore, but they create with their hands. And I use my hand to write, but I am more of the artistic creator when it comes to words. And so, yeah, that's where I see my artistry is. Words have been, and my grandmother was like that. So my paternal grandmother kind of instilled in me the importance of language, and not only having good language, right, using proper language. I also started studying foreign languages when I was very young. And, language acquisition, making sure that you're using the proper language, because you can make more mistakes, and have more of an embarrassing time if you don't use the language properly than, if you have any other physical missteps in the culture. But, that's kind of where I learned to play with words, and not only having reverence for them, but also learning how, like I said, play. Yes, you need to handle them carefully because words have power. But also too, you can play with them in such a way that you can make your own, new creation as well. And so I enjoy doing both. Again, having reverence and also playing with words. That's probably where I see my creative artistry come out most.
Okay, so I guess the first question that I would sit here and say is, how do you empower people with words?
Well, so one of the things that I think we're very trained on is what we're going to do in the world, right? So what do we need to put out there? And what I find most is is that I kind of look at it, not do to be, but be to do, right? So we're kind of trained on this concept of do this so you can be that, right? Do these things as we tell you and you can become a doctor. Do it this way and you will be considered a good boy or girl when we're growing up, right? And so we have this do to be model that we're conditioned to, but I really believe we came here to be who we are authentically, and from that place of being, we choose to do certain things that then create value in the world. And so for me, being with language, I mean, it's more about what I hear in other people's language. Right. And because I read patterns in language, and this is one of my zones of genius or brilliance, is that I've always been able to hear congruencies and incongruencies through linguistic patterning. And, I didn't know what I was doing most of my life. I just knew when something was off and when something seemed to resonate as truth. And so I just learned to ask a lot of questions. And those questions then would garner answers, which would allow me to have more language to listen to. And that's how I kind of pick and chose what seemed safe for me when I was talking earlier about being guarded and, how can I protect and ensure that I'm dealing with a situation that I feel, is safe ground. I really learned how to listen. And so it was using my language much of the time, to not only craft and create, but also to protect and ensure that, I was in a position, that I wanted to be in with the world around me. And so, yeah, language has been kind of my go-to, I guess, sword, you would say, like in a way, like my go-to tool for all of those things. And, like I said, I didn't really realize it much of the time. I mean, I didn't even realize what I was doing with linguistic patterning until I went to go work in the federal prison system with, the transformational men's program that I was involved in. And the woman who facilitated that with me was the one who told me that that's what I was doing. And I didn't have language for it before that.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on what patterns of language, like linguistic patterns, like what is that? If you don't mind, why is it important?
Well, I've had to unpack it on my own because people say, oh, NLP, right? You've studied NLP. And first of all, I have not studied NLP. NLP is a part of what I do, but I just did it naturally. I wasn't taught how to do this. I just, I've been doing it all my life. And so I've kind of had to unpack it backwards, right? I've had to retrofit as opposed to we're going to learn this and then you're going to hone that skill and then you're going to have that skill. I came in with it. I just did it and I honed it as I was going without even knowing that's what I was doing. And that's what happens in our zones of brilliance. We don't even, we have these superpowers we don't even know we have. But what I'm really listening, what I'm able to do, and what I discern that I'm able to do now is both in the choice of words, also in inflection, in pauses that people take, right? If you take, I've learned all sorts of, I've started to pay attention to what I'm doing and how I'm knowing things. But I think also a lot of it is simply instinct, right? And intuition. I'm highly intuitive. I come from a family line of highly intuitive females. And I think females are intuitive anyway, when they allow themselves to be. I think all humans are. We all have intuition, but just almost kind of insane amounts of intuition in my family. And so some of it is just intuitive, but when asked, I do teach people markers around choices of language, like words, for example, people who use just a lot, right? I just need a minute. It's just, going to take just is a bit of a deprecation word. When I hear that coming out a lot, I know that people are uncertain. They have a belief system around what they're saying as being something that they don't really believe either can be true or is true. So there are certain key words that people tend to use that give away certain things, as well as I've learned just some particular nonverbals that can show if somebody's actually lying. So literally telling a lie. And a lie is not, people go, oh, you can tell when people are telling you a lie. I'm like, well, it's not always that they're telling me a lie. Sometimes they don't know they're telling a lie because it's their belief system that's lying about their truth.
It's a self-deception.
It is. It's a self-deception, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like, it's always that people are meaning to lie. They're lying to themselves. And so therefore their language is going to reflect that externally as well. So their internal dialogue reflected externally is going to show the same thing. And I can hear people. So the two things I listen to with clients is zone of genius, zone of brilliance, and what's blocking them from it. That's what I'm really tuning into. Where am I hearing that? I was just today, I've worked with a client for 3 years now, and she said she had an epiphany. And she says, I woke up saying, I want to be a photographer when I grow up. And photography has always been in the background in her life. And when I first spoke to her, that was something that I said. I was like, what I'm hearing is it's photography that you love most. And this was 3 years ago. And she, at the time, she was a graphic designer. And she was like, no, it's the graphic arts. And I'm like, okay. And I just tell people what I hear. I'm not here to push it. But she and I were talking about that today. It's like, wow, this is something that 3 years ago came out in my language, but I wasn't, for whatever reason, ready to acknowledge that. But her, our language doesn't lie. It discloses our truth every time.
But it's almost like you need somebody there to
translate. That's not a direct.
Yeah. It's almost like again, like you need that person to listen as well, because again, like I can't overcome my self-deception unless there's somebody there that's picking up on those things, and especially the more repetitive that it is, like, oh, this person said it, now this person said it, now this person said it, now there's a pattern and I should be dialing in on that. Right. Versus, the one-off, because they could be lashing out too. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. And it's used for good. I always think our superpowers, it's like a lot of times we don't know what they are. And we just know, like for me, I just recognized something the other day that I had never thought about, because I was talking to a friend and he has a background in chemical engineering. And so we were talking about vibrations and how different things have resonant points, certain resonant points. He says like aluminum, vibrates at 444 hertz. Mm-hmm. He says you can vibrate aluminum at 443 and it'll move, and 445 and it'll move, but you put it at 444 and it's like, it gets really excited because that's its tune. Right. And I started thinking about that. And because then we talked about how that it then equates to emotion, the vibration of emotion, different emotions. And it suddenly occurred to me that my own emotional resonance over things that I hear, because sometimes I'll hear something and it might hit me slightly, and other things I'll hear, it actually makes me angry. My emotions get more heightened. And what I recognized is it has to do with the gaps, right? So the gaps in where people are aligned. So if I'm hearing something that's slightly misaligned, my emotion might be slightly like, there's something not good there. But if it's drastically misaligned, or if it's misaligned in such a way that might be taking that person and others down a real slippery slope, I'll actually have an emotional reaction internally. So I can give you an example of a trend that I see in the culture today. And it's a trend around safetyism, and how there's so many people talking about how we need to make it safe for everybody. That actually makes me mad.
We will dive into that in the crowd. I already have it on lock. We will dive into that in the ground. Pump the brakes.
Hold on.
No, we're not really doing that. It's more like you need to go left now.
Not time to take a left. Yeah.
Time to take a left. No.
Exit now.
Yeah. Take Ausfahrt. Have you ever been to Germany, by the way?
Have you ever been what?
To Germany, by the way.
I have.
The signs that say Ausfahrt everywhere, or
yes.
like, Yep. Well, I made the same mistake when I got there. It's like, oh, it's a city. It's everywhere. And I'm like, is it like pointing to like, the cap? That doesn't make sense. I'm like riding on the bus between Ramstein and Grafenberg, Germany. And all of a sudden it's just like the same sign. I'm like, oh, that means exit, drivers. Something like that. Anyway. All right, we'll get back on track. This might be a blooper reel. Okay, so here's the question that I really like to play with, right? And I think we've been treading in this discussion, we've been treading a very interesting, I would say, dichotomy that I've also self-imposed into Meeting Porch, right? Implicitly or explicitly, it turned out to be implicitly, which is the sword and the pen are at the same level, and they're not at the same level because they're the same substance at some level. Mm-hmm. Well, I think I said level like 5 times. Anyway, and so the thing that I always like to ask is how we use our sword now versus how should we be using our sword? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting when you were just talking about the pen and the sword being equal, like they're different, right? But they're equal. Like that's what I hear on the level part.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of what I was talking about with words, right? Yeah. That they can either be constructive and creative. I create with them, but I also defended myself with them, right? I protected myself with them throughout my life. And so really they were one and the same, right? So language was both a pen and a sword for me, or has been a pen and a sword for me in many ways. I'm also not an easy person to what I've been told. This is not my own definition of this. I've been told it's very difficult to win at an argument with me because I'm so mighty with words. Like I can use words to, and I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, because the way I look at it now is it's not about winning. I mean, unless I'm in debate club or something, I mean, if I'm really standing up there to debate because, that's what I'm there to do. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I think in relationships, it's more about building trust, rapport, and connection. And that's not a winning or losing, scenario. So, I've learned a lot about, it was always why do we need to win is because we feel we need to protect ourselves. So, I think learning now, like if I look at kind of typical patterns with me, especially around language growing up. I mean, obviously language was gifted to me, as my buddy in life. Mm-hmm. And that was going to be kind of a vehicle for me, to be who I am in a lot of ways, to show up and to create and to protect and do all the things I do through language. But I think really looking at it now, it's from an intentional standpoint, how do I want to support, the use, using language, as I was saying, for good, right? Is how can I use my own language, make people aware of their language, and how we can create, for good with it. Because I think, just not just me, but I see a lot in the world of using language kind of as a force to be reckoned with. And that can be hurtful and harmful and all of that. I mean, especially now with so much language going out to the world because we have this thing called the internet. And anybody can just tap in and put whatever language they want out there for everybody to see. How intentional are we being with that? How reverent are we being with our words and with one another? So that's really kind of the place I am now. I don't know if that answered your question.
Nope, that's perfectly fine. That answers the question. And again, it's even, and I say this kind of interchangeably. They're on the same level. They're of the same substance, something to that effect, right? And why it's important to be aware of how we use it. I mean, whether or not we're using it right or wrong, like that. Yeah, I asked it and you answered, right? It's in your attention, I think. And that's that, ladies and gentlemen, is something we have to come back to later as well. So we are going to go to the pen, and we have danced around this topic. So So the pen. All right, you can't use your book. I'm sorry. And again, that book is looking in, and you can't use it. And the fun question that I get to ask is, because this is essentially sharing your legacy, right? At some level, it's also about it. It's the zone of impact. I get it. Like really selling this. Like these things are almost synonymous in more ways than one. And the thing the first question I always like to ask is 2,000 years from now, Traci, someone is doing an archaeological dig on your house. And there's finding all these things, right? There's uncovering, you know what? They're not finding anything, because I want to know what you want them to find. It can only be one object and one object only. What is that one object?
And I can't use my book, huh?
Can't use your book. I ruled it out.
The first thing that comes to me, is if they're not, they're finding things, but I always, this is such a visionary thing too. So excuse me for not going straight into answering that.
You're good.
But it's really the capsule, like I feel like you can tell a lot from going into someone's home about them, right? How the home is decorated, how large the home is or small, where the home is situated, even on the property. Is it in the countryside? Is it in the city? You really tell a lot. And, one of the things that has always been really important to me is this sense of people feeling at home. If they can't find me, and that I wouldn't want them to find me necessarily excavating my home.
The Mummy of Traci Philips.
Yeah, right. Exactly. But they could tell by just what they found, right? The plot that is what they're excavating, and that which was in it, how it was put together, to help people feel at home. Because really, that's one of the things. A number of years ago, somebody asked me what my soul mission was, did I think? And I said, it's to help people come home to themselves, right? Is to find their sense of self, their purpose, their superpowers, their all of that, but to come home to themselves so that they can ground themselves to that space and go out into the world from that place. And for that reason, I've often been told by clients that I bring them a sense of peace, right? That they feel they have permission to be who they are around me, that they feel at home. And so I think that's what I would want. It's not a direct object, but I would want people to get a sense from what they did find, that I was, that they could reflect on what they found and say, wow, she created a space that, was inviting and comfortable for people to come to. Because I really feel like that's kind of what I imagine I'm here for.
So even if they find nothing, if they can find the framework of the house and they can determine that this is a home, that is all that's required.
That it's a place for them to feel like, wow, this feels like it was a really comfortable place to be. That sense is what I want people to find, right? That sense of me, because I feel like that's what I leave behind in a lot of ways in conversations. And, I always say that if I give a talk, it's not really a standing ovation that I want. I'll take it. I'm not going to pass it up. But really what I'm going for when I share is to hear a pin drop. Because if I hear a pin drop, that means, or if I'm in this state where we could hear a pin drop, it means that people are so deep in thought and they've accepted my words and started to consider how they apply to them, right? Because it's not about me, right? It's about how, in my eyes, it's about how I share and what I share and how that leaves people feeling, like the value of that to them. They get to figure that out. And if they're opening themselves up enough to consider the words and think about them, then that to me is value. And that's what I want to give, is value. So again, like I said, I'm not opposed to getting value back, but really the biggest thing is to know that what I'm putting out there is valuable for people.
That is another important aspect too. I really liked how you phrased, to be able to hear a pin drop. And that is something I think, people get crazy about awkward silences, but if people are at least in thought are trying to wrap their minds about what was said, I don't know. It just sounds to me as if the standing ovation comes naturally afterwards. Mm-hmm. Because, it's, and let me know if I'm off, but maybe there's a sense of like some similarities here, but that realization is the standing ovation that's required.
That's it. That's my interpretation. Well, and that's why I'm not uncomfortable by silence. Mm-hmm. Because silence means that the person is considering or not ready or whatever, right? But it's not about me in that moment. That person's processing isn't about me, it's about them, mm-hmm. right? And I think if we can give people the gift of space to do that, when we get awkward or we get uncomfortable, that's about us, unless there are uncomfortable silences that I think can, it's like if somebody's sneaking up on you with a knife or something. But, I think in general, in conversation or circumstances where we're having engagements and there's silence, I'm always very curious about that. And if I sense that it's because somebody is processing, I love that. I love giving space and time for that, because there's something brewing that's really potentially incredible, and far too often we're trained to fill silences, right? That mm-hmm. we don't like silence. It's why we've become so distracted, right? As a culture, or as a world in general, is just plugging things into either our networks or our schedules, or, people who just don't know how to have free space anywhere, because we haven't learned to live with silence. And we can't really learn what's inside of us unless we learn how to be comfortable in silence, right? So that's why a lot of people don't know themselves, which is why I want people to be able to have that opportunity to come home and learn.
Like it. I'm on the same level, on multiple levels. So I think we're in the same book. I don't know if it's looking in, but I think we're in the same book.
We're in the same boat.
All right, so we'll go ahead and go into the ground. Okay, so the crown. The crown is the binding agent in more ways than one. It kind of circles everything. If we look at the top right-hand corner of the interview, you'll see the emblem, and it kind of pulls everything together in some ways and holds it together. And I guess there's a lot of different sayings about leadership and discipline and stuff like that. And what I think I want to dial in on is there's two things that are kind of coming to my mind, and that's the recipient quotient, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that earlier. And then safetyism. Mm-hmm. And I'm connecting them. And I would first like to kind of, get on the what really grinds your gears train with Traci Philips, and then jump over to the recipient quotient, and then maybe pull them together. So
yeah. So you want me to start with safetyism as
yes,
an
please.
Just
fire it up.
Yeah, so safetyism actually came from the book, The Coddling of the American Mind. It was written by two authors who did extensive research, looking more at the university level of things, right? University students in today's world, and kind of some of the patterns that they were seeing across our culture here in the United States at the university level, was students being triggered by certain material and not capable of handling certain material in classes, demanding that they not have to study or look at or listen to, certain lectures because they would be triggered and things like that. And this idea that, we're not psychologically safe, and how it's now the outside world's responsibility to make our world internally psychologically safe. And that's just not possible. Not only is that not possible, it's a folly to consider that is our responsibility. And two, I mean, again, we're not capable of doing that, right? I can't reach inside of you and make you secure internally. You can only do that for yourself. And if you're never challenged, you will never learn to do that yourself, right? So it's the whole idea of resilience, right? Mm-hmm. And how we learn how to do these things. And it actually reminds me of a conversation I had with my daughter. She got off the bus when she was in 4th grade. She's now 14, so she's in 9th grade. She was in 4th grade. She gets off the bus, and there were some bullies who had been giving her a hard time in the back of the bus that day. And so she said to me, she's like, "Mom, can you call because they live in the neighborhood. Can you call their moms and tell them what happened?" I said, "I could, but I'm not going to. But I'd love to have a conversation about this." And so asking her some questions. So what happened? Did you ever feel physically not safe with these kids on the bus? No, they didn't threaten me physically. No, they just hurt your feelings. Yes, they hurt my feelings. And they said some things that were really hurtful. And I said, "Well, what did they say?" And so she told me, and I said, "Well, what did you say in response?" And she says, "At first I didn't say anything, and then they kept laughing. And then finally I started to cry, and they laughed more. And then I spoke up and I told them, 'Well, how would you feel if somebody said something to you, that you felt embarrassed and scared by? Would you want that?' And then they kind of didn't say anything. I said, 'Well, do you think they heard you when you said that? Do you think you finally got through to them when you said that?' And she said, 'I don't know, maybe.' And they didn't really say much after that. And I said, 'Well, do you think you handled it?' And she's like, 'I don't know.' I said, 'Well, we'll only know if you get on the bus again tomorrow and they don't bother you anymore, or if they say something a little bit less harmful or whatever.' But I said, 'Listen, this is the point, honey. If you want to call their parents and tell them what happened, we can definitely do that.
Yeah.
I would love to see you empower yourself by doing that.' I said, 'But let me share a belief that I have, is that as your mom, I am going to try as much as possible, everything within my control to keep you physically safe. That is part of my job as I see it. I am not, honey, here to keep you psychologically safe. I'm not here to damage you psychologically, right? My intention is not to do that myself, but I'm not here to guard you from the world, because if I did that, you would never learn how to be in the world.' And I said, so I'm here to help you learn tactics and support you as you develop yourself to know your voice and to know, what you can do about these things and all of that. But I said, if I just fought your battles for you, especially the psychological ones, you would never learn how to be in the world. And the world can be very difficult. And I want you to feel strong and empowered to handle it. And she oftentimes references that conversation, but that kind of, in a nutshell, shines light on how I feel about this concept of us feeling like we have to make everything safe. When we came out of the womb, nobody promised us it was going to be safe psychologically. And I realized that we've spent a lot of time, I speak as a general culture, we've spent a lot of time burying our feelings and burying how we truly feel about things and being martyrs to things we didn't want to do or didn't want to put up with, right? Tolerating things we really wanted to say no to. I realize we've done that, but it doesn't mean just because we've done that for so long, the pendulum has gotten way over here, that all of a sudden we should swing over here in order to rectify it. And so, the reason I get so hot and bothered by this is what I was saying earlier, is I have a resonant point emotionally knowing that if we decide to go down that track as a culture, it is not going to take us to a good place. Right.
No, it won't. No, it won't. Yeah.
We could really get into depth about where that could possibly, and we've been there before in history where we've given up all of that. And I don't think we need to go there again. I think we've learned, maybe other people feel like they do, but I really want people to think about that. People think just in terms of the sound of something, and how we're supposed to help others, right? It sounds good to help. Well, why does it sound good? Well, it's because we've been deeply conditioned to think that's good, to help people. I don't believe in helping people. I believe in supporting people. I think there's a distinction for me between helping and supporting. Unless you're an EMT or you're a person who's hired to save people's lives, right? You are not here to help everyone. The burden bearers, and you and I were talking about this the other day. Let's say your burdens in life are rocks you're trying to carry, or better off bricks. And you come into the room carrying all these bricks. And I say, oh, let me help you. And I get under your burden with you of bricks. And you ask me to get the door so you can take them outside. Well, I can't because both my hands are under your burden of bricks. You're burdened and I'm burdened. So I can't get the door for you. I can't get a glass of water for you either, right? I can't do anything to make you more comfortable, right? Bringing a seat for you to sit in or anything, because I'm also under that burden and I don't have my hands free. But if I support you instead, it would be about opening the door so you can get to where you want to go. It would be about giving you some comfort or something that can help ease that a little bit so you can deal with it more effectively. But at the end of the day, it's for you to carry because they're yours. And if you don't learn how to do that, you don't forge your way in life. Those burdens are there for a reason. We both created them and we asked for them in order to allow us to develop in the way that we want to. And so if we're constantly carrying other people's burdens, one, they can't do it themselves. And two, we're not attending to our own.
Yeah. And one of the things I want to, because I think that's it right there. And that's why I was thinking of it. So the recipient quotient coming into this, right? Mm-hmm. Just quickly define that for a minute. And then I think there's the question that in there that's kind of sticking out in my mind.
So IQ and EQ are two things that we as a culture know, mm-hmm. what IQ and EQ are. EQ has become a very, kind of spoken and targeted conversation in leadership, especially, leaders that have high EQ are really what is sought out today. But there's a third, because if we look at the three brains that have been defined in neuroscience, we've got the head brain, heart brain, and gut brain. The gut brain is our instinct, right? Mm-hmm. And I call that PQ, right? So we have IQ, EQ, and PQ, percipience quotient. Percipience meaning our ability to perceive, right, and sense things that we cannot see, right? So this idea of our percipience quotient, and as you said, I work with visionaries as clients. Visionaries' strongest quotient, we could be highly intelligent people, but we're still stronger in our percipience arena. And
that is the vision, and that's vision, right?
That's where the vision
effectively what you pay attention to.
That's exactly it. That's where the vision comes from. So when people, are trying to explain their vision, like you think of great visionaries who, like Einstein, who's trying to explain to the average person during his time what he sees, and they just cannot wrap, any part of the quotients they're capable of around this concept because it cannot be seen. It hasn't been developed yet. It's not, and anybody who's tried to bring forward something that no one has seen before is challenged. Think about the time we're in now, so much uncertainty because we can't see the future. We never know from one minute to the next what's going to happen. And the people who are making the largest strides right now are visionaries, right? Those visionary those companies that are led by visionaries. All my clients in 2020 and 2021, their businesses have soared. Because that's where this innovative, okay, now's the time to start bringing in the new ideas, because all this uncertainty leaves chaos, and creation comes from chaos, right? And what are we here to do? Create. So that percipience quotient is about instinct. And so one of the first things I do with my clients is to teach them how to hone their percipience quotient, right? How to hone their ability to tap into their instinct, right?
Okay.
What that means, how many times do they shut it down? I mean, again, it's bringing awareness to that first, and then engaging with it, then bringing ownership to it, and then eventually mastery.
So then how do we relate that to dealing with safetyism?
Well, for me, like when I was having that conversation with my friend, about resonance points, I realized that the resonance that I would feel through my emotionality, right? There's a that would tap it. So what I heard in the language, right, then tapped into that same level of resonance within my emotional body. And I got an emotion, right, at that same vibrational level. So what I've come to realize is my emotions have also, as an instinctive tool, I mean, I guess it was more an emotional tool at that point, but as an emotional tool, have also been in alignment with what I'm picking up intellectually through listening to the words, right? But that when I test those theories, right? Okay, so intellectually, I'm hearing it through the language. Emotionally, I'm feeling it through my emotional quotient. And if I test it to my gut instinct, it always resonates as true, right? So it's like, what's my sense? So the three things I always say with having people test their various quotients is, what am I thinking? That's IQ. What am I feeling? That's EQ. What am I sensing? That's PQ. Right. And so it's that sense perception. Do I sense that is the right way to go, or do I not? I mean, it's kind of like getting into a fork in the road. We have absolutely no ability to tell whether left or right is the right way to go through our head and through our emotions. Don't know. But our PQ will always tell us. If we can, if we can push away those other two, the head saying, I don't know. Okay, turn that off for a second. Right? The emotions, like, I'm stressed because I don't know which way to go. We can turn that off for a moment, and we can just tap into what we sense, we will always know.
So if we go into PQ like that, the percipient quotient. So if we go into that and we're dealing with the narrowing, right, ideas associated with safetyism.
Yes.
Is that enough? Do you think that's enough as leaders, right, to support and take on the right burden as a leader, a coach, or something to that effect? Is that the gateway to which we can do
that? I mean, and again, I don't think it's so much taking on burdens as much as it's about empowering people to deal with their own, right? It's about creating spaces of empowerment, and even the way people talk about empowerment is, in my opinion, is not correct, because they're talking about empowering others. You can't empower others. You can create a space where others can become empowered. Right. But you can't empower others. It's like me doing some sort of, energy voodoo on you. I'm empowering you. No, I mean, that's not how it works. It's like, I don't have spells and stuff to, like, create some sort of juju empowerment thing over here. It's literally about me creating the space, listening, making room for, like, that's what DEI is all about, in my opinion. Diversity, equity, inclusion is about creating spaces that allow for that, right? Yes, that means we may do some physical things like bringing certain people into our organization and creating some sort of trainings and that kind of thing. But it's all about making room and space for. That's really, leaders are there to make space for other people to thrive. But it's not about, you can't do the work to make someone thrive. You can only create the space that's going to support them best, but they've got to do the work to thrive themselves, right? So we can diversify, we can make things equitable, and we can include everybody, make a seat at the table and include everyone. But until those people each individually show up and do the work and bring their best self and value forward, none of it works. We can't do that for them. And the more we tell ourselves we have to, the more we have this slippery slope where people can say, not take responsibility themselves and say, oh, that leader is not offering what I need to feel safe. And so it's like, well, what are you doing to make yourself feel safe?
Yep. It's a two-way
That's what
street.
I want to ask.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I agree with that in so many ways. It's not even funny. And one of my early realizations was I own the relationship with my leadership just as much as they own the relationship with them. And if one person abdicates that responsibility, I have to in a way make up for that by opening that, creating that space, as you're saying, right? And having that conversation. And I think that's it, right? Like it's kind of what we've been trying to kind of get to is in a way of dealing with this is to create a space so that people can perceive these things and not be so coddled.
Yes. I mean, it's a balance, right? Because the other piece is we're also being asked to have reverence for different people's way of doing things. But again, one of my favorite models of all time is actually two models that have been used together. And that's David Emerald's empowerment triangle model and Stephen Cartman's disempowerment dynamic triangle, right? So Stephen Cartman, psychiatrist, in the 1960s, created this disempowered dynamic triangle showing the roles of victim, persecutor, and rescuer, and how they that's how when we show up in our ego, we tend to we create these dynamics. And so that we also see the life through this lens. So a victim looks out into the world and sees two things: perpetration and rescue. Who or what is perpetrating me, and who or what needs to rescue me, not taking therefore any responsibility themselves for anything that they're experiencing in life, because that's their lens as victim, right? So when I am in victim, I can only interact with the world through that dynamic. And so you're either, if we're talking and I'm in victim mode, you're either my persecutor, rescuer, or I might make you both, because that's the only way I can engage with you.
Yep.
Right? Because that's what I know. I only know those roles. Or you're another victim and we commiserate with one another. But what Emerald came along and said was, okay, we need an antithesis triangle. What do we want instead? And he created creator, coach, and challenger. I like to look at coach as the concept of support, right? As opposed to help, right? The rescue helps somebody. The coach supports them to help themselves, right? So instead of being the victim, the creator looks out into the world also and sees two things: challenge and support in equal measure, hopefully, ideally, but that they know that the creator knows, taking full responsibility for their life, that they both need challenge and support to grow. So they don't see persecution or perpetration as persecution and perpetration. They see it as challenge to their growth. And they have a different experience with that challenge because of that. Right? So, that is what I love to teach people, because from that space, now all of a sudden, we have to be a creator in our own life. And so with leadership, I teach people, it's not about going and trying to convince people to leave that disempowered dynamic. It's about inviting them into an empowered one. So setting up an organization that uses language, that has structures, that has ways of dealing with things and communicating, that's all around this concept of empowerment dynamic, right? And that when someone is, and it's not about shame or blame, when it comes to people being in disempowerment, people don't know what they don't know, right? Most of us are walking around in disempowerment unless we know, right? And we can then bring ourselves into a different dynamic. But it is about staying in that place. And as soon as we learn how those roles work and how those dynamics are created, then as a leader, it's about, again, like I said, how do you invite people? Even when you get pulled into dynamics of disempowerment, you don't have to play. You can stay in your empowerment dynamic and invite them over into your space. If you want to engage with me, come over here, take responsibility. And I'm here to support you, but I cannot come into your disempowerment dynamic. I will not. It's not going to serve you, and it's not going to serve me, and it's not going to serve this organization. Yes, right? But absolutely. We need those frameworks to work from. So, that's actually one of the tools I like to use most, because again, a lot of the language that I'm hearing, and quite frankly, a lot of the energy I'm getting from people's posts, even I was engaging with someone today and I could feel the energy of this person was just so defensive. The language is just defensive. And when we come to any engagement from a defensive angle, we're going to create a defensiveness to that engagement, right? Because now defensiveness, guess what? It's in the disempowered model. We're basically like, you're perpetrating and you need to fix it. And there's a lot of shame and blame there without people, being obvious about it. It's very subversive. And it's totally done unconsciously, but it's done from a place of having had enough. People have had enough. They've gotten way over here in the pendulum, and now they're going all the way over here. You need to make it better now. And they don't realize it, right? All of this, we need to be seen as this, we need to be heard as this, and yelling at the top of their lungs, we're not going to take it anymore. That's because we've gotten to a far angle, and we're trying to swing it back, but going all the way to the other extreme isn't going to do it. And as I always tell people, it's not what, it's how.
Yeah. I like how all that, I think I have to change some of the language is empower in that empowerment model, because I think I'm on the same page, or at least in the same book. Right. And one of the things that I often wrestle with, and this is why earlier I asked, right, about the pen and the sword, right, and like how we should be using that. Well, one of those ideas is not to use it defensively at all, or offensively, right? It's and or offensively, because there's something that if I can give you your sword, or at least show you how to make it, and create the space for you to make it, you can break your own chains.
That's right.
And that is more important than me breaking the chains for you, right? In this metaphor.
Right. It's teaching a man to fish as opposed to giving them a fish. And the other thing I tell people and remind them of is there is a very subtle message that is sent when I do something for someone. It's that I'm doing it for you because you can't do it yourself.
Agreed.
And the more we do that, the more people learn they can't do it for themselves. They need someone else to do it for them. The more we disable them or enable them to continue not to do for themselves.
Yes. And I think we can keep going on the crown, and I want to in some regards, but I'm going to have to get us to transition, because we can keep going on this topic for way too long. So we'll go ahead and go into summary. Hey, Traci. So thank you so much for coming on the Meeting Porch, right? And now in the summary, I get to kind of play a little bit with what we talked about, maybe see some things that we didn't, completely capture, and ask some fun questions. And so one of the things that I think it's interesting, one of the many things, right? And it's just going to kind of flow here in a minute. Some words kind of come to mind: grounded, peace, diligence, hard work, and growth to a point as well. And all of these things have kind of come together to help Traci trust in the process of self-development and self-improvement and self-development. And then from there, something I think really interesting happens, because we started talking about language and the sword and using that. And I unfortunately, I probably have to rewind, but for those who are watching, go back to the sword and listen to, because she says something as well. It's interesting. And it like talking about convincing and talking about a few other things, and you're empowering others by creating a space, and this is how I'm interpreting it, to, I guess, pull out self-awareness through language. Because as you mentioned before, like you sit there and it's like, that doesn't make sense, but now I can ask questions, and now I can start creating more words, and then those words from this person start to kind of create the bigger picture, and this bigger picture can then be be redirected and to kind of take a few lines from your website, stuff like that, but to focus and like laser focus in on something. And then that's the experiment that people start to take in when they come see the Innate Coach, and they read Looking In right here. Shameless plug. Anyway, forgive the glare. And to me, it was so interesting because like we were starting to develop it. Like we weren't really like in that. And then we started talking about the idea of creating spaces that are like your homestead, your home, your base of operations, everything that makes you feel confident in the world, right? To know where you can come in and relax and think through things or whatever the case may be. And I found it interesting because in a way, then we segued into leadership. So keep in mind, like we're pulling all of this weight behind us. Like it's not just like sitting here and just going like, oh, well, here's this individual sections. No, ladies and gentlemen, this is moving forward in time and space as well, but it is segmented. Now we have to pull it all together. We have to come to its singular crashing point. And the home becomes this place where you can then go off and still understand that you can encounter the world and create other spaces, and you still have somewhere to come home to. You still have a space that is yours through your zone of brilliance, your zone of achievement, and your zone of impact. And then, the sword, the hammer, the sword, the pen. And I just found this conversation interesting, kind of going through that. And I appreciate that. And I guess the question that I would like to ask is, did this conversation illuminate anything to you that maybe you didn't know before?
Yeah, you know what it has done for me, because I'm thinking about that very thing as you're talking, is these are aspects that I have become aware of, but it's kind of like being aware of aspects like puzzle pieces in a puzzle. Like I'm aware of all these pieces, but I maybe have only put together 2/3 of the puzzle. I still have 1/3 of the puzzle with just the pieces that haven't been fit together. And so really you've given more clarity to kind of how some of these things fit. And one of the things that you just said that was really remarkable to me is, people have often said to me, clients usually, they leave our conversations feeling empowered or energized or relaxed or whatever they needed, they would probably get otherwise from going home. So what I'm really doing is modeling how they can create that space within themselves, right? I'm the surrogate momentarily for that home space, that place that feels comfortable, where they can be who they are, and they can dive around and play in that space and get to know themselves better. Because again, at the end of the day, we want something like you were saying with words and language, are like bricks that we can physically use to build something, right? When we have the physicality of words, we can literally define things. And when we can define them, we can measure them. And when we can measure them, we can figure out whether they fit or not. And exactly in what way and in what dimensions, right? On what scale. And so you really had me thinking about what I offer and being who I am, right? In all of the experiences that I have had and all of the, purpose that I came into this world to develop, is a lot like this idea of being that surrogate home, comfortable space to show people how to do that for themselves. And I hadn't thought about it in those terms before. I've been told that in various different ways, but I had never made that direct connection the way you just put it.
I just found it interesting because there was something that resounded when you said, we started like, and again, I'm putting some of this in my own words as well. So being honest here is you're able to create the material for others through language and through that back and forth. And it's it's beautiful in its own right, because then people can start to like you're right. Like you're not convincing. You're not using a magical power to convince them, right? The magical power, the magic in this, in all of this, is more attributed to them spewing out, or not spewing is probably not the right word, but speaking into the like existence these things, right? And then those things are able to, they're able to therefore get a better picture, and you're able to guide them like like a mentor and a coach, so that way one day they can call their own plays, and they can build their own house. And I really appreciate this conversation. Like I really do. And I thank you so much for coming on. And I guess what I would like to ask is first off, are you a sports fan?
I am. I like, there's a lot of sports that I like. I like football a lot.
Okay.
So yes, I'm a sports fan.
So are you a Denver Broncos fan?
I am. Yeah.
Do you have any desire to own a Ford Bronco in your life?
My grandfather had one of the old-fashioned Ford Broncos. He had the either real old school ones that were so popular for a while. Yeah, he had a Bronco.
They still are popular.
Yeah, I guess they are. I mean, it's like a good black dress. It never goes out of style. Yeah, those Broncos are really super cool. But yeah, no, I feel like I had one through that surrogacy, because I grew up, riding around the back of it.
Okay. And now watch, she'll go grab a Ford Bronco whenever the chip solution gets resolved. That's good. That's good. I guess what's the one team that you absolutely loathe? And it's football. So who's the one team?
Yeah, I don't know if I loathe. I'm not a fanatic fan, which I guess I can't say I'm a fan unless I'm not fanatic, because it's kind of one and the same word. I'm more supportive than I am fanatic. Let's just put it that way. I don't really loathe any other teams. Obviously when we play the Cowboys, at times when we used to play the Cowboys, that was a huge rivalry. I actually like Green Bay. I have a lot of respect for the Green Bay Packers. But I know that, that's always been kind of a rival. I also lived in the Boston area, so I have deep respect and admiration for the Patriots, which a lot of people dislike that team just because they won so many times. Like they like to hate on the winners, but I don't really have a particular team that I really dislike.
Fair.
Maybe the Steelers. Maybe Pittsburgh. I don't know. It depends.
If it's not New England, typically it's Pittsburgh, unless you're a Pittsburgh fan. And then there's problems. And like I can just kind of like see like now like the teams that you would admire, because you got to admire the Carolina Panthers. I'm sorry, you live in North Carolina, so you have to deal with that. Then you admire the Baltimore Ravens.
Yes. That's my daughter's chosen. She was born in Baltimore. So we all have different teams. My husband's is I guess what are they? Just Washington D.C. They're not the Redskins. They're not called the Redskins.
Yeah, anymore. I don't know what they're called anymore. If that's
they don't have a team name, but the ones in Washington D.C.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. All right. Well, what kind of conclude? What are 3 books that you would recommend people read? And no, you can't lose looking in yet.
Can't use that one. Yeah, I figured. So my number 1 favorite book of all time is called Yes, You Can Change the World. And so most of my favorite books are less than 200 pages. I do like the reads that aren't going to take forever, because we're all busy people. But so Yes, You Can Change the World is written by Aman Motwani. He's an Indian author. It is absolutely priceless. It's written in story form, so it's very engaging. But it really shows how, just the average person, which we all are average in some way. We're all the average person, right? Has purpose and meaning and is incredibly impactful in this world. We will never know who we've impacted and who we've touched in our lifetime. We will never know all the people that we've done so with. So it's a beautiful story about a son coming to know his father through the stories of other people and how his father impacted them. The other book I really love is The Power of TED, because as I was referring to before, the empowerment dynamic is what TED stands for, the empowerment dynamic. His model of the empowerment triangle, I think, is incredibly powerful. And when people really understand how that works, it's a game changer. It's my favorite tool of all time as a coach. I also really love The Alchemist. And I love the 4 Agreements. That's actually more than 3, but
that's fine.
Those are,
there's
a lot of
like that. Perfect.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead and go into your final word. Your final words, again, it's all about you. And well, actually, really quick, let me do one more good solid pitch, and let me know if I'm off here. I won't edit this out, I promise. So, Looking In by Traci Philips. And I'm going to really quickly tell you why I'm attracted to this book and why I found it an enjoyable read. As I said, it's a story from cover to cover, because you start by looking in, like you're looking at a mirror, reflection of yourself in more ways than one. And then you travel through a play of 3 acts. And during those 3 acts, you are outlining your zone of brilliance. For people who watch Meeting Porch, that's also your hammer, and a few other things too. And then your zone of achievement, which is what you're achieving. And I liked how you put this in there. These are kind of your resume bullets in some regards. I really enjoyed that. And then you end with your zone of impact. And it doesn't end there. And the reason why it doesn't end there is because there's a story that really spoke to me that I found really, really, really helpful. And that story was when you were out at an event, public speaking, and so and one of your audience members got up and responded in an interesting way, we'll say. And the way you handled that is amazing. And I don't want to give too much away. Let's just say being intentful and paying attention to your intentions is incredibly important. And that's also a word that we should be summarizing with this conversation today too. And so before your final words, what were your intentions before walking into this?
To have fun.
Perfect. I like it. I did put you on the spot because that was funny. But anyway, we'll go right into your final words, Traci. And I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much. And the floor is all yours.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me today, James. I know I call you James and Jim. You go by Jim here, but this is what you're doing here is an incredible opportunity, not only for people on as guests to unpack, some very, very important aspects to who they are and why they're here, but also obviously to your listeners, to be able to be a part of that experience. And, on that word experience, that's probably my final words, are really around this idea that all visionaries who I've worked with, me included, really came here to bring forward experience, right? For us, it is about the experience, right? Between the 2 bookends of life and death. It's the experience we're having, and how can we bring meaning and purpose to that with intention. And how can we move things forward, right? How can we leave this planet, this place, better than we found it? And so for me, really, it is a reminder that, and I appreciate the words that you said about the book and that one particular piece, because what I always like to bring up when people ask me about that particular part of the book, because it seems to be a very popular story in the book, but is that I am no different and no better, any greater at being, that eloquent graceful person in difficult situation than anybody else. Maybe I've had a little bit more practice, but I'm human too. I think really what happened in that situation, which is kind of my point here that I'm about to make, is that with intention, all sorts of things are possible. We actually become entirely different people when we put intention into our words, into our lives, into our engagements with others. When we really apply that idea of, who am I? What do I have to offer? How do I want to offer that? How do I want to put that out into the world? How do I want to impact others? Right. And why? Why is that important? When we're really intentional about those things, then magical things really happen. I've had many stories of my own life and many stories within my clients' lives that they've shared with me around the power of intention. But I think really to understand that not only do we have that as a power and a choice that we're making all the time, but that really our focus, not on the destination, but on the experience, right? On the journey in between is what we're here to really enjoy. Right. And so working hard doesn't mean we have to get rid of the joyous part. We can be diligent, we can be consistent, we can be all those things that allow us to move forward incrementally. And we can also do it joyously and with fun and really focusing on the experience that we both want to create for others, but that we want to have for ourselves. So again, it was such a pleasurable time spending with you here on the Meeting Forge. And I hope that this conversation adds some value to other people's lives. That is always a big intention of mine. And I thank everybody for listening, and go out there and have a great experience in your life.